August 5th, 1947, exactly 2 years after an atomic bomb destroyed Hiroshima, a trainload of returning soldiers arrived in a Japanese railroad station. Two years after the war, and they were still coming back. From faraway outposts on Pacific Islands, from prison camps, from hospitals. The conquered men, the disillusioned and the weary men, the men who would have to build a new Japan. Another train, another shipment of hopeful soldiers who searched for familiar faces. Another formal speech of welcome from another mayor to heroes who were no longer heroic. This was the homecoming of Kenji Marawa. There were no relatives to greet him. There were no friends. Only the faces of strangers occupied with their own problems, their own sorrows or joys. Even the city that he had known so well was a stranger. A place where familiar streets had disappeared as though by magic, leaving only ruins behind, impersonal and bleak. It was impossible for him to believe that a house had once stood here. A house where people had gotten up in the morning and gone to work, had eaten meals and gone to bed at night. Impossible to believe that this had been his house, his family, that this was all that was left of home. This little tea kettle, how well he remembered it. It seemed only yesterday that it was singing merrily on a stove while his mother prepared tea for the family. Every night, just before bedtime, they used to play a game of Go. Grandfather always won, because they let him win. Kenji would never forget that last night at home, the night before he left for the army. It was a solemn moment as they all knelt before the family shrine and prayed that the gods would find Kenji worthy of sacrifice to the Sun Emperor. Yes, they prayed, but his mother cried. Was it yesterday or 100 years ago that this book had lain on the little shelf in his bedroom? And this snapshot, where were those schoolboy comrades now? School days had been good days. Days of faith, of security, and sureness. The teacher was a superior whose authority could not be questioned. He was treated with deference and humility. You listened, you obeyed, and you believed. Japan must expand to survive. The Sun Emperor has said it. The Sun Emperor is divine. Our destiny is to rule the world. We will conquer. We will conquer. The Emperor has said it. The Emperor is divine. War, destiny, conquest. Yes, yes, yes. The friends of the snapshot are gone now, along with the fanatical belief in the holiness of war, the underlying faith in the gods themselves. For the gods of Shinto had betrayed Kenji and all the people of Japan. The old gods had somehow lost face, and there were no new ones to replace them. There was not even faith in a future in this world of ruins, of inflation and unemployment, this world of thieves and black marketeers, of beggars and war orphans. The boy's name was Shirou, and he was like a lonely puppy who had found a friend. Kenji had found a friend too, a friend who was hungry. And the next day he started looking for work. But finding a job wasn't easy. Unemployment was widespread. If a man heard of a job, he told a friend about it. And Kenji was a stranger in the city he had once called home. And then Shirou told Kenji about a factory which had just reopened last week. But it was always the same story. Most of the factories that had not been destroyed in the war were still shut down, and the ones that were open again had all the help they needed. The days of searching were long and weary, and what little money Kenji had was almost gone now. He became so hopeless that even Shirou's boyish encouragement had little effect on him. And then, as he looked again at the old snapshot, he remembered Tomio, his friend Tomio, who had written down his address here on the picture so many years ago. Tomio would know what to do. Tomio would help him. The address wasn't far away, just on the other side of town. young woman who opened the door was Aki, Tamio's sister. Kenji was overjoyed to see her and asked for Tamio. But Tamio was dead, killed in the war. Aki spoke gently and quietly. It had happened early in the war, somewhere in the Pacific. But there were so many who had died. Kenji could hardly speak. He could only say he was sorry and leave. As Aki and her mother watched him go, they sensed something of his loneliness and despair. They decided to ask him to visit them and to bring Shirou too. How about next Sunday afternoon? Kenji was touched by their friendliness and gratefully accepted. With renewed courage, Kenji continued his search for work, and at last he found a job in a small machine shop. A job for Kenji meant lonely days for Shirou, but there would be money for food now, and a rented room that they could call home. It was good to be at work again, to feel useful and wanted, to do something that wasn't aimed to destroy other human beings. And it was good to find new friends, men who gave him a helping hand or a word of advice. For the first time since his return, Kenji began to believe that there was such a thing as a future. But the future, for Kenji and for all the people of Japan, brought problems. The problems of a new way of life called democracy. Today, for example, the workers in the shop were meeting to form a labor union. An American Army officer was on hand, and the men wondered what he would order them to do. The Americans were their masters now, and they were ready to serve them. But the officer gave no orders. He said he was here to help them to help themselves. A labor union was a democratic institution in which free people could join together and protect their rights as workers. They could do their own organizing, elect their own leaders. It was their union. Kenji listened. He was pleased, but he was puzzled, and so were the others. This was something new. They were used to leaders who issued orders, while they had only to obey. If they were not told what to do, how would they know how to act? This democracy seemed good, but it was very confusing. Meanwhile, Shirou had decided that if Kenji could work, so could he. He could be a businessman too. But Shirou had forgotten that among the boys of the streets there was only one law, the law of the jungle. As Kenji came home from work that night, he felt happier than he had been in years. He had a job, friends, neighbors, a home, and Shirou. Shirou had been beaten and robbed of his earnings in the broad light of day. This could never have happened in the old Japan, Kenji was thinking. But the old Japan was gone. And this new Japan, disorderly, chaotic, was this democracy? At work the next day, Kenji was silent and worried. What kind of country had he returned to? What kind of future was in the making? One thing sure, he wasn't going to let Shirou turn into one of these lawless boys of the street. To begin with, the boy was going to have new clothes. At least he wouldn't look like a street urchin. On the following Sunday, Kenji and Shirou went to visit Aki and her mother. It had been a long time since Kenji had known the warm feeling of being welcome in a friend's home. And there was something about these friends, a kindliness, and a tranquility that made their home a happy place to be. They were strangely different from the women of old Japan, just as polite, but freer to be themselves. They were really interested in Kenji. And they were concerned about Shirou, too. What had happened? How had he hurt his hand? Kenji told them how Shirou had tried to be a shoeshine boy, how he wished that Shirou might go to a good school and receive the kind of care he needed. Aki knew of a school that would be just the place for Shirou. It was a Christian school. Yes, Aki and her mother were Christians. Even Shirou had noticed the picture on the wall. Shirou's first day at the new school was a happy occasion for everybody but Shirou. He was full of doubts. Who were these strangers? What were they going to do to him? He felt better when he saw Aki. And when he got into a baseball game, he felt still better. Even during the war, baseball had continued to be Japan's favorite sport. And Shirou felt thoroughly at home with a bat in his hands. Kenji went back to work, happy and confident that Shirou would be cared for. He didn't quite understand why these people, these Christians, should be so kind to him, but he asked no questions. There were other questions to occupy Kenji now. This union, for example. Good man and well-liked, but he was no leader. He didn't tell them what to do. He asked them for suggestions and ideas, but they didn't seem to have any, except for one man and a couple of his friends. This man had ideas, big ones, ideas that he believed in, ideas he was willing to fight and die for. Ideas that he wanted to spread far and wide in this war-torn, troubled country. Ideas that could take easy root with a people who had long been used to a strong voice of authority. And when that voice promised more jobs, more houses, more money, Kenji, along with the rest of them, listened. They listened, and they liked what they heard. Here at last was a leader. And when the chairman called for a vote, the voice of authority won its first battle in the fight against the freedom of the individual. Kenji was impressed. This man, his friend and comrade, had spoken forcefully. He seemed to know the problems that faced this new Japan, to see the need for order and reform and action, positive action. And then Kenji fell in love. He couldn't have said just when it happened or exactly why. It wasn't just that Aki was beautiful and intelligent. He had met beautiful girls before, intelligent ones too. It was something else about her, a quality that seemed to radiate out toward people, toward the world itself, a kindliness, a warmth. She had a sort of dignity too, a quiet sureness about her own value as a person. And yet he had never known her to be conceited or proud. She was interested in everything, and so was he. And so naturally they never seemed to get through talking. One afternoon, instead of walking in the park, they went to the university where Aki was studying. At first, Kenji felt ill at ease. His own education had been cut short to the war, and he'd been taught that teachers were superior beings who must be deferred to. But these professors were different. They were human beings. They didn't talk down to their students. They talked with them as equals. They were friends as well as instructors. The science lab made Kenji thoughtful. Science could discover penicillin or make an atom bomb, save lives or take them. It all depended on people. If all people were like Aki and her mother, if all people were kind and generous, perhaps there would be no wars. Maybe that sort of kindness could only exist where people were free, to think for themselves without fear, without orders from above, free to disagree and argue and compromise. In the library, it was the same thing. No books were banned, no forbidden political or religious philosophies. Here, in a Christian college, there were books on Buddhism, Judaism, or Mohammedanism, books on communism, democracy, or socialism. Here, a man could read anything he wished and come to his own decisions. Here was the book about Christianity, the Bible, the basis for Aki's faith. Kenji was curious. What was in this book that was so important? On the following Sunday, Kenji and Aki went visiting again, this time to the home of Aki's friend, the Protestant minister. Kenji had started reading the Bible. It interested him, but he had lots of questions. And so Aki had suggested that he go talk with the minister himself. The idea of questioning a religious man about his faith seemed very rude to him, and at first he felt embarrassed. But the minister's friendliness and informality soon put him at ease. The minister talked simply and quietly without trying to force anyone to accept this faith of his. And Kenji relaxed and listened thoughtfully. At union meetings, Kenji listened too. Here he learned about another kind of religion, whose god was a state. This idea was equally puzzling to him, and he wanted to learn more about it. His friend had answers to his questions, answers delivered with a voice of authority. A man must give himself to the state. This was the only road to economic security and happiness. One day, Kenji and Aki attended a discussion group at Aki's church. The subject for debate was communism versus democracy, and their relation to Christianity. Kenji was excited and interested. Now at last, he was going to watch these two opposing beliefs fight it out in an open discussion. Maybe now he would be able to clear up his own questions and decide what he believed in. Because Kenji had reached a point now where he felt he had to make a choice. He had to believe in something. The debate raged back and forth. Kenji grew so excited that he wanted to talk himself. But he was awkward and shy, and words failed him. Meanwhile, Kenji's friend at the shop gave him some reading to do, too. Kenji's mind was hungry for ideas these days, and he took the pamphlets eagerly, hoping that here he would find an answer. The communists had an answer, one that was as clearly stated at labor rallies as it was in their pamphlets. Their arguments were persuasive. The capitalists had used democracy as a means to their own ends. They had robbed the workers, and the workers had only one recourse: to seize power themselves. By trickery, by lies, by bloodshed. It didn't matter how. To a man in Kenji's shoes, these arguments were appealing ones. They promised him economic security such as he had never known. All he had to do was believe and obey. Let the state be his protector, his benefactor, and his God. Promises, security, food, jobs, houses, health, and happiness. Yours, Kenji. Join us, comrade. Fight. Fight. That night, Kenji could not sleep. The words of the speakers at the rally echoed in his mind like the beat of drums in martial music. Food, jobs, houses, fight, join us, fight. These were words that he had heard before, promises that had been made before. Other leaders, other rallies before the war. The same faith in violence, the same hysteria sweeping the crowd, the same waving banners, the same cheers. Here were the books that promised things. Jobs, houses, health. These were important. But was happiness only a matter of comfort and well-being? The Bible said there was something more, and Kenji wondered. The next day was Sunday, and Kenji and Aki went to church. To Kenji, this seemed to be a meeting too. It was not a very large one, and the speaker talked quietly, without frenzy. And yet there was an atmosphere here that Kenji liked. He felt at peace with himself and with the world. Perhaps this man had an answer too. He suggested that love, not violence, might reshape man's world. That spirits as well as bodies might need food. That a state was made up of individual souls, each responsible to himself and to his God. And Kenji was thinking, I have no God, but perhaps I could find him if I tried. Kenji's friend at the shop became more powerful and finally took over leadership of the union. The democratic principles of good trade unionism, which the American officer had described, were lost sight of and forgotten. The union became a political organization. It told the men what to think and do, not only on the job, but after working hours too. Kenji objected. A man should be free to choose his own political beliefs. A union's purpose was to protect its members, not to dictate their politics. Yes, Kenji objected, and he got into trouble. To the communist leaders, Kenji had become a dangerous man, a man who dared to disagree. And communism, unlike democracy, has only one solution for a dissenter: liquidation, complete and absolute. If you're not for us, you're against us. A man's machine can be tampered with, so that he'll be fired for inefficiency on the job. friend can betray you, because friendship doesn't matter. Honesty doesn't matter. Moral issues are unimportant, because the end justifies the means. Only the welfare of the state counts. And so now, Kenji was back where he started from, jobless and alone. But he was not quite alone. He still had Aki, and she was proud of his courageous action. Perhaps the university could help him. There might be a scholarship or some job for him there. But disappointment awaited them. There were no scholarships available and funds were low. Barely enough to keep the school going. But there was even worse news in store for Kenji. Aki was going away to a teacher's college in Tokyo. She had postponed telling him as long as she could, but the day of her departure was close now, and he would have to know. Kenji took the news fatalistically. He might have known that things would turn out this way. Aki tried to cheer him, but she felt sad herself. On the day of Aki's departure, Kenji and Shirou went to the station to say goodbye. It was a sad day for Kenji. Without Aki, he'd feel lost, and Aki too was worried. She smiled, but she wondered what would happen to him. As much as he might like the democratic way of life, would he have strength enough to fight for it? In his confusion, he would need guidance, and he would also need a job. She prayed that there was something the church could do, something that America could do, for Kenji and the millions of young men like him. Here, in this railroad station, is where Kenji's story began. But it doesn't end here. In his time of trouble, Kenji is turning to the church, where he has found friends and a beginning faith. What the church can do for Kenji depends on us. You and I will write the ending of Kenji's story together.